the last 20 years, the APIs are really booming. The companies are connecting to each other, but it's not just the company. Actually, it's within the company where it's most APIs, right? So when you think about it, there are sort of like three types of API. A lot of companies are actually struggling with this, right? You want to build whatever you want to build, some crazy good new product, and you need to integrate a lot of APIs. And that's really not your business, right? Let's say you are building something really interesting in let's say recruiting HR space, and you need to connect to all those HR systems, ATS systems, they are called applicant tracker systems, right?
Hey, listeners and audience, welcome to another episode of InvoTalks. So, guys, today our episode is all about the emerging economy, which is API economy. And let me remind you, this economy is going to rise up to 5.1 billion this year. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about the API economy, as I said, and API-led growth for businesses, trends to watch out in the API economy. And for this and more, we have awesome Z with us. Z is the CTO and co-founder of Superface. Superface is an awesome company which helps companies and different businesses in integrating APIs. So Z, how are you?
I'm doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Okay, so before we begin and jump into all the questions, this podcast is powered by InvoZone, the software and web app development company with offices around the globe. So, Z, before I jump into all the questions about Superface and API economy, tell me about yourself. How did you find out that API is going to be your ultimate love and you're going to come into this?
It was not expected. I never planned for it. But I have joined a startup called APRA many years ago. It's actually over a decade. And APRA was one of the first, or if not the first, API design platform. So this is like 2010, 2012. We were saying, APIs are pretty important for your business. You should treat them well. You should design them first. It's not a byproduct of engineering. It's actually an important thing in your company. And as such, it should be basically treated as a product. So that was, again, 11 to 12 years ago. And APRA basically launched the product, and it got a successful, rounds of investment. And then it has been acquired by Oracle some 5-6 years ago. So those were the days when we were like going out and preaching APIs are good for your business. They start taking them seriously, start designing them, start taking care about APIs. So that was basically where I got into APIs.
Oh, that's awesome. So the company you built was acquired by Oracle.
I was one of the first employees. I was not the founder. So it was not technically it was a startup that I joined. But yes, it was acquired by Oracle. I think it's now 6 years ago. So it's part of the Oracle. After API, other API design platforms came, and also API hubs.
Oh, that's kind of awesome. So that's where you found out that you want to be in the API business, right?
So I basically, joined that community. I found that there are very nice people, very forward-thinking people with API. So all the other API experts in the field, there are, of course, global conferences on API. So we started, preaching this new approach. Back then, new approach. Today, it's hopefully normal to treat your API as a product. But then it was a novelty, and and we took it from there. After Oracle, I started my consulting firm. So I work with the largest enterprises on this planet, like Deutsche Post, DHL, Adidas, Inditex, mother company of Zara, and others, all helping them with their API strategy. So after basically saying you should be, doing APIs this way, I went into the trenches and worked with the companies on their API strategy and on the execution with APIs. So I guess I'm in this field for a while.
That's interesting. It's really good to hear about your journey. that you have worked with such big businesses. Moving towards the next question, as we said, we have technical and non-technical audience. I want to know for our non-technical audience, in simple term, what is an API?
API is a application programmable interface, and basically is a way for an application, maybe on your phone, to talk to computers somewhere in the cloud, right? So for example, if you have Instagram or TikTok, to basically being able to upload images or send messages or whatever that application is doing, order a hotel or food or whatever it is. So that's possible. It's basically an infrastructure for applications to talk between each other. But also it works for the websites and browsers. So if you go, let's say, Zara.com to buy some clothes, when you put it in the cart, when you make the order, when you maybe put your credit card there, this is all powered and possible through APIs.
That's interesting because I think APIs have revolutionized the businesses and have really helped one business in connecting with another business, and in a very simple term. Because as this economy is growing, I think the stats which are like 5.1 billion in this year, I completely agree. APIs is gonna grow more and more, and I hope that it does and it makes our life more easy.
So they've been around, of course, for much longer than 12 years. There were historically APIs. Before that, some older, implementation and technical protocols to exchange the information between the companies. But let's say in the last 10, 20 years, the APIs are really booming. The companies are connecting to each other, but it's not just the company. Actually, it's within the company where it's most APIs, right? So when you think about it, there are sort of like three types of APIs. So those internal ones that are enabling, let's say, one department application within an enterprise to talk to another one. So I don't know, order system talking to inventory system, right? So is it on the inventory? Can I create an order, or the other way around? So those would be an internal APIs within the company. And of course, now with the microservices, there is more of these internal services, so more of the APIs enabling these microservices to talk to each other. Now, that's internal APIs. Then you have a public API. So an API which is accessible to the general audience, maybe with some terms, but anybody basically can connect with proper authorization to that API and get some value out of it. Examples might be, let's say, a Twilio, which is a company for sending text messages. They have a public API where if you register, maybe you have to pay. You can send the text messages with them, right? So your application talks to that API, and the result is it might send a text message to a phone number, right? So that would be a public API. And the final type, it's a partner's API. So it's something between the private or internal and the public one. It's an API that you build for another company, right? That's your partner company. Your company is having maybe some products, your company is offering something, and you need to, let's say, connect to buy some materials from other company, or the other way around. They want to buy something through you. So these are the partners API, which are not necessarily public, but they are also not internal, right? They are meant for your important partners or companies you are basically working with.
Interesting. From this, the question came in my mind is like, what is the best API strategy for a business?
That's a very difficult, that's a very big question. Let me rephrase it. So the first thing foremost, it's important that the business understands the value of APIs, right? Mm-hmm. That's one of the, when a company starts taking APIs seriously, it's still in a way engineering thing. It's still a very technical thing. And for some business people, it might be quite difficult to get a grasp on it and how APIs are actually helping the company. So first, there has to be some alignment and also buy-in from the management that APIs are important. There should be an API program. We should have an API strategy as a company, right? So that's a number one thing that has to happen to even, be able to think about a successful API strategy. And then, of course, it depends on how big your company is, whether and why you are employing APIs, right? It might be, so the drivers for APIs are many. For example, the simplest one would be, I have some value in my company. I have some information. I have timetables. I have the ability to send text messages or whatever it is, really. And I'm exposing this to the public so people can or other companies can buy it and exercise it, right? Example would be get me results of I don't know, sport event, right? I want to know how this match ended up or not. That might be a very simple API that offers this information. You fetch that information, you pay me the money, right? That's the most straightforward driver for an API economy. Just pay basically for the data or the value you are getting. But most often than not, this is not the main economy driver for companies. The other ones would be, let's say, those partners APIs, right? As I mentioned, so other companies can connect. Maybe do some orders. Another reason might be, of course, internal efficiency. I want to have efficient communication between the departments and the system within the company. And another might be this driving of revenue generating activities. So very simply put, you have the Zara.com and you have an API that enables you to sell the clothes through Zara.com, right? That's not the value directly being delivered to API because people are shopping on that web application in the web browser, but API is enabling it. So when you are thinking about the API strategy, once you get the buying and once the business the management understands the value it is bringing, then you can start moving forward and you can start build a successful API program with a good API strategy.
Interesting.
Again, you need to really understand how are APIs, helping your business, and it very often is not direct. It's very often not. I have this API, I make money on it. That's usually not that direct, scenario.
Yeah, I agree with that. As a person who is connected with startups, I come across this question a lot, that can you list down the steps in which I can easily implement the best API strategy? If you can list down some steps, or you can, in pointers, tell us that if there is a business and it wants, or a startup, or it wants to, implement APIs, what are the steps they can take for easy implementation?
Again, it depends how big you are, right? If you are talking about a company that has 6 developers or a company that has hundreds and hundreds of developers, right? There, with the largest enterprises, you need to have some sort of center of excellence, which enables building the APIs within the company. And that's a quite complex process, but I think you mean smaller companies, like, small developer teams. Okay. So again, first of all, assuming that the management of that company or the founders understand the value and what APIs are bringing, then I think the best next step is to try to understand who are the users for the APIs, right? Is it within your team? Is it your partner company, or it will be somebody random? Random as in you don't know that person. And start basically like with any product work. Start, think about it as a product. That's a good thing. And think about, okay, so what do you do if you want to build a product? You need to understand the users. You need to understand the market. So, it's really a product, right? At some point, it gets technical. At some point, you need to start designing your API and picking a architectural style. But first and foremost, you need to understand who's going to be the user, what are their needs, what are their use cases, before you start designing your product, in this case being API, right? Then it's different because it doesn't have a UI. It's really just an interface for other applications. But start with the product owner. Of course, if you are small, you don't have to have a dedicated product owner. Starting and writing down the use cases. What are the values your APIs? Is it like, I don't know, creating orders, ordering food, whatever it is? Start thinking from these use cases. before you get into technicalities. How do you implement it? Do you use this API style, that API style? That's coming after understanding who are the users. And as with every good product, you probably want to first do some prototypes. So don't implement, API right away. Just create some prototypes. There are tools for it so you can mock it, so you can basically, create a prototype of an API before really committing to it, show it to potential users, ask them if that's what they want to. So this is really nothing different to any other kind of a product, right? So I think that's the best way to start with APIs. Think about it as any other product. Only at some point it changes to the technicalization.
Hmm. Interesting. I really like the prototype thing you suggested for startups. From this implementation and the things you suggested, I want to know what Superface does. I know for our audience that it integrates the AI, but what other awesome things Superface is providing businesses and startups to get started with API? I'm really interested in knowing this.
So the problem with APIs is that there are a couple of problems, but at the end of the day, API is connecting two pieces of software, right? Two applications. Your I don't know, Facebook application with a Facebook server. But in order for this to work, you need to have an engineer that comes, a programmer that comes and lay down the wires, manually connects that application with that API that you want to use, right? That started okay. But the problem is, as you said, that the APIs are growing, APIs are everywhere, covering pretty much everything. And we have engineers laying down the wires, connecting each and every microservice or application with that APIs manually. That's how it is done. And basically, in that process of creating an API, at some point, you will have to, as an API provider, out of an API, you will have to create an API documentation, which some engineer has to read and program other application, according to the documentation, right? That's of course not scalable. And it's of course a lot of tedious work. I call it plumbing. And it creates this commit to the play and trying to teach people that this plumbing can happen autonomously, meaning that application can be programmed for a task. I don't know, create an order, send SMS, whatever it is, and not having an engineer doing that plumbing or laying down the wires. That can be figured out automatically by that software. And that's what Superface is really trying to do. Getting those plumbers out of the equation so we can focus on more meaningful work than laying down the wires and digging tunnels, because the applications can figure out how to connect and connect. And so the developers can do better things than just laying down the wires. So Superface is helping from the customer standpoint right now, right? Because if you want to connect to an API, you need to do a lot of programming. You need to establish the API integration. You need to spend a lot of time doing it. And Superface enables it for your application to connect basically without that programming.
So from this, I assume that Superface is time efficient as well as cost effective.
Absolutely. So yeah, and there are and these times and costs are distributed. Of course, first on a setup when you first want to integrate, but then over the time, that's another problem with APIs. The things are changing, right? You connect to that API at one point in the time, then their owners needs to add this, change that, maybe have a new business rules, or maybe different pricing, or whatever it is, or maybe it stops working entirely. So it's not just the setup of the APIs connecting your application to that API, but it's also over the time sort of monitoring and maintenance of that integration, whether it's still working, whether it's still doing what it has to do. So the efficiency and the cost saving is not only on the setup, but also during the maintenance, during the lifetime of the application.
Well, that's awesome. I must say that's awesome because many startups and companies do face problems in terms of API maintaining them and integrating them. And I think Superface covers this whole process as a whole.
A lot of companies are actually struggling with this, right? You want to build whatever you want to build, some crazy good new product, and you need to integrate a lot of APIs. And that's really not your business, right? Let's say you are building something something really interesting in let's say recruiting HR space, and you need to connect to all those HR systems, ATS systems, they are called applicant tracker systems, right? That's not your business to, I mean, connect to all these different APIs. One of our customers came and they were like building AI for posting on social media. Now they need to integrate with all the social media platforms, with Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it, right? That's not their value, right? Their value is this algorithm that creates those posts automatically and not maintaining those integrations with those companies. So this is exactly what we want to enable. We want to enable companies and developers to focus on the cool stuff they are building and not worrying about laying down the wires.
That's interesting. From this, I really want to know about the genesis story of Superface. How did you guys start it? How did you guys come together?
It really goes to the story of APRA and my consulting afterwards. So with APRA again, we were saying treat your APIs product, what we already discussed here. Here are some tools for it. Then I did the consulting and worked with many different enterprises across all the sectors, from banking, logistics, fashion, automotive. It's all the same problem with APIs. Doesn't matter. It's really not different whether you are a bank or whether you are the largest automotive company on this planet. The problems with APIs are the same. Of course, maybe the security is a little bit more tight in the banking, but in general, I was like, this is something we need to solve, with the product, not with the consulting. We should not be teaching people write better documentations or write them nice, in a nicer way or more efficient way, when I know that the documentation is simply not needed because the application can go autonomously, right? It's like I felt again that we were making a better or nicer or stronger horses, where I knew that there could be this car, aka the autonomous integrations. So that's really coming from me doing a lot of consulting, working with a lot of companies, and seeing that this work is repetitive and nobody really loves to write documentation. Very few people likes to read the documentation. So it's really just logical that especially
I hear that.
and so it's very logical that, if we can automate it, we should probably automate it. So that's how we started, and I approached my friend, who is, savvy in building companies and running businesses, and we started together, and that's how Superface started.
That's interesting. So I would sum up it like you guys saw the problem and you guys jumped in to solve it.
Yes. Well, yes. I came up with this technical solution, and then we started the company. But yes, this is the story. We were basically my friend who joined me, Radek, who joined me as a partner in Superface. He's now a CEO. He was having his startup in hospitality, and his startup was building this guest experience. You come to the hotel with your phone. Maybe you want to check in on your phone. Maybe you want to order some food on the room or whatever it is, right? And so he needed to connect to all the different hotel systems, right? And then he was like, oh, okay, I need to connect to all the hospitality systems with my little startup application. And it started like to be a big problem for him to build all the integrations to all the different hotel systems. So he felt it from his like product or business owner perspective, because he wanted to create a startup that needed to integrate APIs. And I was coming from the APIs and I was like, this doesn't make sense. These things can connect autonomously.
Interesting. So tell me, you had a founder and you were there, right? You and your co-founder. Did you had a team by then that you developed, or you hired a remote team for that?
So we were lucky. Though we started too. Then we fundraised some money, but we approached a local friends who actually were very interested in this and saw some potential. So they joined us and helped us, and also the friends from APRA and from the past jump on the board. So we are mostly people that know each other from the previous jobs, and we are working together on bringing Superface and also integrations.
That's interesting. So, what's the inspiration behind the name Superface?
Behind, sorry, what?
Behind the name Superface.
Oh, it's it's apparently not my printer face, and it stands for super interface. So it's just really as an API, it's our application programmable interface. This should be a super interface. Yeah, it's really just the abbreviation for the interface, not the face. Super interface.
Oh, that's kind of interesting. I was from interface and face. I was like, you kind of grabbed the sense and mixed two things, and it was like Superface. That's kind of an awesome thing.
Yes.
So, moving towards the API-led growth and API economy, I want to know that where do you see the API economy in this coming year? Because this year has just started, and many people and many tech pundits are predicting many things like stats and etc. But where do you see the API economy? Because you're the guy who is in the business very successfully and you're leading your company.
So I think there are at least three major trends. One is asynchronous API. So this is maybe a little bit technical, but traditional APIs are you are building an application, it wants to do something, so it asks that server, it asks that API to do it, right? Sending text messages, creating invoice. The other approach with the asynchronous, so-called asynchronous APIs is actually from the server pushing to your application. Hey, something happened. Hey, there is a new invoice. It's like also called event-driven, right? So these event-driven or asynchronous APIs are gaining the traction and are getting very popular. So this is what I'm seeing, and a lot of companies are jumping on the asynchronous APIs. So not your application asking for something, but content being pushed into your application. So that's definitely one trend and something that is growing. The other thing that is growing, and it's not so apparent, but it's definitely part of APIs. A lot of companies are having these programs for partnerships, and they are getting and onboarding a lot of partners. So there is a partners APIs are everywhere, and they are booming, and there will be more and more APIs for partners. So not these internal APIs, not the open APIs that everybody can use, but a partner API for the company. It brings a lot of problems because you need a kind of certification process for your partners. So, you know what they are doing. You can allow them to, basically interact with your systems, and that also gets to security. But definitely partners APIs are something that's gaining the momentum, gaining the traction. And the final thing, I would say, it's this so-called the unified APIs. Now, with all those APIs and with manual wiring, manual plumbing, we got into the problem that I call API fatigue. People are simply tired of all the different APIs they need to connect, right? They want to connect, but it's too many of them. To illustrate it, if you are building an e-shop, which now there are a lot of solutions for online shops, but let's say if you would be building it and you would like to connect to logistic companies from your shop to send physical goods, whatever you are selling, and you would like to do it in Vietnam, in Europe, in the US, in Africa, wherever on the world, you would need to connect to a lot of logistic companies, right? A lot, like, to being able to physically deliver the goods in that country that you want to operate. Now, this is actually, again, not your job. You are building an e-shop. You are not trying to integrate with the logistic company in Vietnam or in the US, right? So what happened, what started to emerge are these sort of unified APIs. So an API, usually they go by verticals, by these domains, let's say logistic. So one API that some company will build in front of all the logistic companies, FedEx, UPS, you name it, right? So this company is really doing nothing else but a facade in front of all the logistic companies. So you can integrate just one APIs because you don't want to be integrated 120 APIs. And as a matter of fact, in logistics alone, there is over 100 of these companies that are all basically these virtual providers. They don't really do much else but providing one unified APIs to actual logistic companies. And this is happening in banking. You want to build some in the banking space. You want your app to work in the UK, in Germany, wherever it is, to integrate all the bank APIs. You would spend, your entire life just trying to integrate all the banks, right? So these unified APIs, they are mostly coming from some verticals like logistics, like banking, and others. And there is more and more of them, and more of these unified APIs are coming simply because you cannot integrate all the APIs manually. But that's also where Superface jumps in.
That's interesting. The concept of unified API, that is, I think, I'm completely agreeing with you, is going to be trending in 2023.
Absolutely.
Okay. One thing, I came across some stats, and I think this can affect the API economy I would say, in an adverse manner. That 94% of the companies last year faced the API attacks. I want to know that how a company can save themselves from an API attack.
Well, you can probably save yourself from the API attack, right? Or maybe more precisely, security issues. It doesn't always have to be an attack, right? But it's a very, very complex problem. But you need to understand that when you put something on the public, so publicly available endpoint, an API, an interface, then yes, it might be, interest of some malicious people and malicious attempts, right? And there is a lot of tools and solutions trying to help you. And actually, we were at the conference, I think called API World. It was in October in the US. And one trend I definitely noticed was that of all the booths in the conference, let's say there were like 50 booths, good half of like at least 1/3, maybe 1/2 of all the booths, different API software, API tools, were about security. So I never seen actually so many security, startups and companies until last year. So there is definitely a boom going on when it comes to the security. There is a lot of companies trying to address the security issues from all the different angles, and it's a very, very, very broad topic and very difficult one. But it goes back to the API product and product design. And it's not only about the attempt of, I'll try to break your APIs and I'll try to, of course, breach some information, but it's also about, what informations are you sharing with the API in the first place? This personal identifiable information, PII. Here in Europe, we have this GDPR, so we should not be really, sending some personal information. So if you are, and it starts with this product work. Is it really necessary to, share somebody's address with that API or somebody's name or this personal information? So that starts, the security starts there. You need to first design your API carefully, understanding what might be the sensitive data, what are not sensitive data. Do you really need that sensitive data being available to that API? So it starts with the actual design. Is there a valid use case for sending a credit card number or whatever it is, right? In many cases, you might prevent a lot of the security issues with a good design. And then it goes, of course, to the testing. There is all sorts of different testing. You have your design of your product, of an API, and then you have its implementation. So you need to be really testing whether it is implemented as you said, whether there are no, let's say, endpoints providing other informations or some hidden endpoints that can be abused. And then, of course, at the runtime, then it's protection at the runtime. So we have API management tools that are basically guarding the process. There are many processes of authentication authorization, and then you have some, of course, on top of it, basically on the internet infrastructure, CDNs and tools like that that can prevent from denial attacks. So it's a very broad topic, but it's again starts with a product design and simply don't put the sensitive information in that API or some informations or endpoints that can be abused unless you really have to do that.
I completely agree. It all depends upon the product design. I am really thankful to you, Z, for being with us, giving us your time. It was such enlightening to hear about Superface, what you guys are doing, and I wish you guys success in leaps and bounds because I found Superface really amazing.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to be here. Have a good year.
Thank you so much.